Welcome to the Town of Norfolk Planning Board meeting for today is Tuesday, right? March 18th. And we are gathered here this evening virtually via Zoom at 7 p.m. And we are here. And so the meeting was posted online at the town's website with the Zoom link and a call-in number, and it is also being live streamed on NCTV, and it will be available for recording, or it is being recorded, so it'll be available on the YouTube channel hereafter. So we have, I guess we'll do a roll call of our planning board members. So do we have Chris Montfort?
Aye.
Do we have Gary Sullivan?
Here.
Eric Diamond?
Yes.
Melissa Mayo?
I'm here.
And Gary Searle?
Yes, I am here.
And then we have myself, Chad Peck. We have our town planner, Rich McCarthy.
Here.
And we do not have Betsy tonight?
We will.
Okay, she's just not here yet. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So we just really have a very short agenda. This is a special meeting, kind of out of our normal cadence. We're here tonight to talk about the MAPC, just kind of some of the inclusionary and feasibility for the downtown.
And I strongly encourage.
And just we're not being live streamed. Just not that.
I know.
Oh, we're not. I'm sorry. Okay, my bad. So correction, we are not being live streamed, but it is being recorded.
It is being recorded. Yes. The
for the
select
clarification,
board meeting is being live streamed. So tonight we have Juwan Park and Alexis Smith from MAPC. I'm going to let them run the presentation. Juwan's going to run the presentation.
Yeah. Thanks for having us tonight. Yeah, I think.
And just before she gets started, I think we've made a lot of good progress. I think it's very informational. You'll see tonight. And just one thing, I know you had got a couple of comments in terms of some numbers behind the presentation. That is something that will be part of the final report, but I'll let Juwan kind of talk as we go through this. Why?
Hey, Rich, we're getting some feedback from Peter Diamond's mic. Can you mute him?
So, conservation and.
Okay, there we go. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that. Well, anyway, so I know a couple of comments about numbers to kind of realize as the presentation comes on the topic, which is the mixed use commercial and also the inclusionary. So anyway, they do have numbers, but thought it'd be more appropriate to be in a final report versus this presentation. So has a proper context. And so those numbers are available and they will be available. I just want to let you know before as they move forward to the presentation tonight. So back to Juwan to let her start the.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll quickly share my screen to start us off. Is it a full screen mode right now? Can you see my screen well? Okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much for having us tonight and give us opportunity to present the progress for the Norfolk Town Center Zoning Feasibility Analysis Project. And yeah, as Rich mentioned, I think we have been making a good progress in consultation with Rich, and we've learned a lot, and so we're really excited about this presentation and discussions we're going to have tonight. Alexis, do you want to take from here?
Yeah, I can take it from here. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. My name is Alexis Smith. I'm a principal planner at MAPC who has been working on this project with Juwan. And I kind of head up our feasibility analysis wing at the agency. So this is an exciting project and excited to be here to talk with you about it tonight. So let's just jump in. So we'll briefly walk through the background and goals, which you all are familiar with. And then Rich had thought it would be useful to give like a kind of in-depth development feasibility 101, as much for yourselves as for folks who might be like us, not streaming it, but watching the recording, whatever else, just to really make sure that, you know, this is not easy stuff, and to make sure that everybody kind of understands what is going into this, so that, you know, so to equip folks to make informed decisions. We have a couple of case studies of, you know, nearby municipalities that have done some interesting things with mixed use requirements that might kind of give some examples of how the town might want to approach it, and then some recommendations. So with that, let's keep going. So again, project background, y'all are familiar with this, but for the benefit of folks who might be watching the recording, the town currently requires mixed use development in the town center with a requirement for a certain amount of affordable housing. But in general, what I don't want to put words in Rich's mouth, but I believe what Rich has heard pretty consistently from folks and what we heard from developers that we interviewed is that the requirements combined are just not really workable. That it's the affordability requirement and the mixed use requirement and the availability of sewer, and there's a couple of things stacked up that make things really difficult to make things pencil. And I believe that's, again, Rich can speak to this in more detail, but you know, why things haven't really been happening in, you know, under this zoning in the town center. Slide. And so again, so the goal of this project is to look at the zoning, pull a bunch of market data for this analysis. We use a whole lot of industry sources like RS Means and CoStar, some proprietary MAPC rental database, census data, all that stuff. We combine that with developer interviews. We interviewed about half dozen folks who are active in Norfolk, and just for the broader context, we have interviewed, I think, close to 50 developers that are active across the region in the past year as part of a lot of the feasibility work we're doing. And so we're kind of able to place Norfolk in the broader universe of what's happening regionally. You know, look at what we think might work based on all of these inputs, and then make some recommendations for you all. All right, so again, this is our development feasibility 101. Apologies if this is some of you are probably very familiar with it, but we thought it was pretty important to get this out there so that folks watching at home, the recording, streaming, whatever, kind of understand how what this analysis is based in. So next slide. So you'll know this. There's a lot of things that go into the cost of development. The biggest chunk of that is building construction costs. But I think my big takeaway here is that a lot of these are costs that developers don't necessarily have control over. You know, steel costs as much as steel costs, you know, and there's not a lot of leeway there. The architect cost, you know, you can maybe find an architect that's a little bit cheaper, but there's not a ton of leeway on a lot of these outside of the developer fee and land acquisition that a developer has control over. The vast majority of costs, you're kind of just, you know, working within a pretty narrow negotiation window. And that amounts to units that are, you know, in this area of Greater Boston, in Norfolk, you know, in the $350,000, $400,000 a unit range in terms of total development costs. So what goes into project costs? There's two big buckets here. One is the ongoing month to month, annual, year to year cost of what it costs to run the building. It's managing an administration, you know, getting a new unit leased up when it turns over. There's maintenance anytime there's a leaky faucet, all of those things happening at mass scale. keeping the driveway plowed when it snows. Property taxes are a big chunk for a multifamily building, which is a good thing for the town, but something that the developer has to take into account. Utilities get only getting higher, as we all know. And insurance and reserves have been getting really, really high lately, even though Massachusetts is not in the same bucket as like a Florida or California in terms of risk. Insurance companies in general are getting pretty cagey about what they want to insure buildings for. And so a lot of folks are getting hit with insurance raises. And that's not just multifamily developers, that's single family all the way across the board. So that's kind of like stuff that a project has to pay every month or every year, just, what it costs to run a building. The second piece, which actually comes before that, is what it costs to build the building. This shows up on a month-to-month basis in terms of the loan repayment. But essentially, at the beginning of a project, a developer gets a massive loan that covers about 2/3 of the cost of purchasing the land, building the building, buying all the building supplies, paying the general contractor, paying the architect, paying their legal team, all of that. And then over the course of the life of the building, they're repaying that loan, and the remaining third of what it costs to build the building is typically comes from investors. And so then through the life of their building, they're also making those payments to the investors and loan payments and payments to the investors in addition to the month-to-month costs like maintenance and taxes. Next slide. So income, a lot simpler. It's pretty much just rents. If we're talking in a rental project, some buildings charge for parking, some buildings might charge for use of the party room or whatever else. But I think for the purposes of our discussion, we can just say that's rents. And so in short, the rents, the project, in the same way any household budget works, in a development project, what you're bringing in has to be more than what you're spending, or else it's it's non-solvable. So next slide, please. So again, as long as a project is bringing in more money in rents than what it is paying in maintenance fees and its mortgage repayment and all of those other things, that's likely that's a feasible project. And developers are gaming all of this out from the moment that they consider looking at a piece of land. And if they think that this is going to work, they'll proceed. In general, what they're looking for is a 15% rate of return. That is very, very broad. But if we will be using internal rate of return as one of the cost metrics that we look at. So we can get into that in a little more detail in the memo that we provide on costs. But for now, we're just broadly talking about, is the return sufficient for a developer to think it's worthwhile? Next slide. So our goal, MAPC's goal as an agency, is to help our municipalities get as much community benefit as they can while maintaining development feasibility. It's essentially walking the tightrope between, getting as much out of the development as you can, but not asking for so much that developers aren't interested because the project isn't feasible. Community benefits, there's a lot of different things that a municipality might require. In Norfolk, the two big pieces that the town is already requiring are affordable housing and ground floor retail space in the town center. So look at what these community benefits do to a project's bottom line. If a municipality asks for some affordability, that in general means it costs the same amount of money to build those affordable units. The cost of wood doesn't change, the cost of a toilet doesn't change, but they're bringing in less rent. And so the overall project income decreases. Now, I don't believe there's a municipality in the greater Boston that can't accommodate some degree of affordable units. We're in a strong enough region that most developers can't handle that. And that's what's shown here, a little bit less than what would have been required, a little bit less project income than in a full market rate building. But, as long as your income is greater than your project costs, then you're good. And most projects can handle some degree of affordability. Slide, please. The issue comes if a municipality asks for too much affordability. And all this, and then again, your project costs do not change. It costs as much to build an affordable unit as it does to build a market rate units. There's no difference there. But as you add more and more affordable units and decrease the rent, then at some point, there is less project income coming in than what it costs to build the project. And that's the point at which the developer will say, like, no, I can't make this work. So next slide, please. Same thing with commercial space. Commercial space is tricky from a feasibility standpoint, but for several reasons. One, because on a per square foot basis, commercial space just brings in a lot less income than residential space. Residential is much more profitable for a developer than a commercial space. Commercial is also very tricky because it is difficult to lease commercial spaces. In any but the most robust market, we're talking, Assembly Row or Back Bay or like that level of a robust commercial area. Anything outside of that, lenders often will require that the developer assume that the property is going to be empty, that the commercial space is going to be empty, just because it's uncertain who will fill it and how it will get filled. So that's another thing. But in general, we're saying, okay, a little bit of commercial space, it's bringing in less money per square foot than residential would. It might not bring in any money at all. But even if that's the case, a small amount of commercial space, there's still enough money coming in through the residential rents that you're greater than the project cost. So again, most projects can handle a small amount of commercial space. Next slide, please. But as you would have predicted, the greater the amount of commercial space that's required, the more likely it is that whatever is coming in project income, whether through reduced a number of residential units or simply from a vacant commercial space, or even if it's just from a commercial space that's not bringing in as much money, if it becomes less than what it costs to build the building, then that doesn't work. And that's essentially what's happening in Norfolk today under the current bylaw. And so that's not to say that the town can't do anything though. If the town, if these benefits are really important to the town, one thing we say is that you can add additional units through a density bonus or whatever else. And that's one of the things that we'll be talking about today. And the addition of those market rate units then can increase your project income back up and then be enough to offset the cost of those additional affordable units. Next slide. Another thing that towns can do on the cost side of things is to reduce. There's a little bit less to do in terms of reducing project costs. Fee waivers or something. We did hear from a few developers that there's a lot of cumulative fees. Helping out with that water and sewer connection, is a huge project cost. Again, that's not anything that you can address through zoning, but just so that you're aware of some things, there are things that municipalities can do to both help with the project income side of things and to help with the project cost side of things if they wish to ask for a lot of these community benefits. Next slide. So I'm going to essentially say the same thing in a different way. But market rate units, let's say a single market rate unit costs a certain amount of money to build. Those are those little pink dots, and we can give you more details in a memo with actual numbers. They bring in more income from rent than they cost to build. So that's any market rate unit that you add to a project is generally going to have a positive impact on feasibility, or double positive as I'm calling it here. An affordable unit costs the same amount of money to build as a market rate unit, but you're bringing in a lot less income from rent. And so the addition of any affordable unit is kind of like a net negative impact on the bottom line. And so a developer will be trying to balance the right number of market rate units and affordable units to hit the return that they need. Sorry, next slide. A commercial space in a strong retail district can be a net positive. Commercial construction is less expensive than residential construction, so less of a upfront cost. It also brings in less rent than a residential unit. But in general, if the space is occupied, that can be a net positive. But unfortunately, that's not necessarily Norfolk's market. In next slide. In other areas of the way for outside of small, strong core retail districts, still have to pay the same amount of money to construct a commercial district, but you can't guarantee that you're going to be able, it might take 6 months to lease up space. I think we've all seen empty retail spaces and mixed use buildings in various commercial districts. And during that whole time, that is a net negative on the pro forma or on a project's bottom line. So all of these are things that a developer is balancing and trying to fit into place when they're deciding whether or not to pursue a project. Next slide. So the goal here is to figure out how all these pieces work together, and then how the town can tweak its zoning to better facilitate development that's feasible for folks who want to build in town. I'm going to stop there and ask if folks have any questions on kind of like the general feasibility overview.
I don't have any questions, but I think where you're heading is like, you're just trying to find that Goldilocks zone. It's like
Yes.
the Goldilocks zone for the town of Norfolk.
Yeah, exactly. And the interesting thing is like there can be a couple different Goldilocks zones. Like if Norfolk is what Jumon will get into this, but if Norfolk is like, if the biggest goal is commercial space and the town is willing to be flexible on affordability, then there's one Goldilocks zone there. If the town is not less interested in commercial space, but affordability is a huge priority, then there's a different, there can be different Goldilocks zones, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah, thanks, Alexis. So, as Alexis walk us through like basically how feasibility analysis works and like what kind of data we look at, developer interviews. From here, I'm going to present a few case studies we've done, as well as our initial recommendations that we can have a discussion about today. So this case study, we basically looked at how other communities in the greater Boston area structure their mixed-use zoning. And the goal really here is to understand what kind of standards are commonly used so that they can inform more feasible policies for Norfolk. So to do that, we try to look at the communities with kind of similar development contexts or aspirations for vibrant mixed-use downtown. So currently Norfolk requires 35% of the total building area to be commercial. When we look at other communities, those communities often set commercial requirements based on the ground floor, and many of those pair these requirements with design requirements like window transparency to ensure active street frontage, not just commercial square footage. So when we look at this, we look at Marlborough, Foxborough, Lexington, Maynard as case study. We look at way more municipalities as a case study, but we came up with this, 4 different case studies to present today. And looking at Marlborough and Foxborough, they're, using appearance/design as a requirement instead of requiring certain percentage of commercial uses, specifically, asking for transparent windows covering at least 35% of the ground floor facade. For Lexington, is interesting case because it mixes both use and appearance as a criteria, saying at least 30% of the ground floor has to be occupied by commercial, but also limiting residential uses along the street frontage to 20% to prioritize ground floor commercial activation. Maynard, compared to those 3 communities, Maynard tend to have higher requirements for mixed use. Obviously, Maynard operates slightly in a different market context. Basically, they require 50% or more ground floor to be used as commercial. And also they say at least 15% of the total floor area of the building to be used as commercial as well.
A quick question.
Yeah.
At least Foxborough, if I'm recalling correctly, has met their goal for affordable housing. Do you know about the other towns, and do you know what kind of impact that had on them changing the equation? We're nowhere near that. They have an advantage if they've already met their goals.
Right. So in terms of, in the case of Foxborough, they don't have inclusionary zoning policy. So, like when we look at, mixed use requirement plus inclusionary zoning requirements, obviously, having lower or no affordability requirement kind of helps feasibility. Not saying that that's a good thing. I think if I'm recalling correctly, we also look at like inclusionary zoning of these communities. We didn't include in this slide for this presentation, but I think overall for both all Marlboro, Lexington, Maynard, they tend to have like 15 to 20% affordability requirement. Maynard might have higher affordability requirement, but I think generally it's 15 to 20% at the 80% AMI.
Gary, were you asking about percentage of units on the SHI?
I thought Foxborough had achieved their goal of affordable housing years ago, and they no longer, I'm not sure if I assume the burden has been reduced or eliminated on developers, or maybe they just have a 10% to maintain the 10%. But we're catching up. We're trying to reach the goal. So it's different. And I was just asking, aside from Foxborough, are these other towns in the same situation where they're not playing catch up to the same degree? We're at about 6%. Rich could correct me if I'm wrong. So I assume that maybe as you get closer, you drop the number, or if you're at goal, you only want to maintain your 10%. So it makes it more attractive to developers to move in.
I do not know. That's something we'll have to follow up with.
Okay.
I don't believe we had this how close they are to their 10% on the SHI. So we'll follow up on that.
Okay.
I have that
Thanks.
information, Gary. So
Okay.
Foxborough is over 10%. Maynard is at 8.9%. What are the other communities? Lexington?
Yep.
Lexington is 10.77%.
Hmm.
And is there another community I'm missing, guys? Marlboro is at 10.70%. So here
Yeah.
again, these communities have higher inclusionary zoning percentages, but they're all either there's one that's just at almost 9%, 8.99, and the
Yeah.
others are all over 10%.
Yeah.
So you can be far more selective when you're there than where we are, which is somewhere around 4.5%.
Yes.
I have to run to the select board meeting. I'll be back.
I'm glad you were here, though.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sue.
thanks for having that
Thank
list on
you.
hand. We should have done that.
So based on that, based on the feasibility analysis and the case studies we've done, we develop a range of policy options, and these are kind of meant to balance the community goals like active, walkable town center and affordable housing goal with what's actually buildable in kind of development environment that Norfolk is in. So these options kind of span from, when we look at this option 1 to 5, so this column 1 to 5 is basically mixed use requirement. And that is paired with different affordability requirement scenarios. So this option span from kind of more, like higher mandatory commercial requirements, starting from option 1 to a more feasible development friendly options, which is option 5. So option 1 is requirement of 50% commercial space of the ground floor. Option 2 is on top of option 1, we assume that density bonus is provided, basically 25% more units, which means because Norfolk currently has a residential density limit of 16 units per acre, that would mean up to 20 units per acre will be allowed under option 2. Option 3 is requiring 25% commercial of ground floor. And option 4 is on top of option 3, kind of similar to option 2 option, having density bonus of 25% more units. Option 5 is kind of assumptions for minimum commercial component, and we're analyzing, we assume 10% of the ground floor will be actually built as commercial when like minimal commercial commercial requirements is there. We also look at, how each mixed use policy combination performs under different affordability requirements. Currently, it's 20% affordability requirement at 80% AMI for 20 or more units. And so we tested with 15% affordability requirement and 10% affordability requirement and no affordability requirement scenario. And the matrix as a whole, when you look at it, it kind of summarizes how each option affects development feasibility depending on how much affordability is required. So for example, option 1 has a high commercial requirement, which is 50% commercial of the ground floor, and it becomes very infeasible when affordability requirements is added on top of it. On the flip side, option 1, when you look at option 5, with only 10% of commercial and no affordability, which will make the development the most feasible, but may not meet the community goals. And looking all of those, the most feasible approaches lean toward kind of having less commercial requirement, like moderate commercial requirements with a moderate affordability requirement, 10 to 15%, and density bonus as a cost offset. So basically, that option 4 requiring 25% commercial ground floor plus density bonus paired with 10 to 15% affordability requirement will work. And obviously, like option 5 will work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's meeting the community goals of having mixed use, basically. So considering all this, we wanted to present a few recommendations that can balance community goals and development feasibility. That is, basically first of all, setting a more moderate commercial requirement, 25% of the ground floor requirement rather than current 35% of the total building area. And also incorporating some design requirement, requiring 35% of the street-facing facade to have a transparent window to contribute to the active storefronts and active streets. But also one of the important recommendations we wanted to suggest is to allow flexibility, basically by allowing waivers for commercial requirement based on the site and locations when the developer successfully proved that mixed use is not feasible. And when we're crafting this recommendation, we're thinking about, especially the challenges around sewer where, building commercial doesn't really make a lot of sense in terms of feasibility standpoint. And also, as we presented as part of the option 4, offer density bonus as a cost offset to provide like buffer in balancing out the cost of building mixed use and affordable housing. And yeah, when it comes to inclusionary zoning affordability requirement, we recommend reducing the requirement from 20% at the 80% for 20 plus units to 10 to 15%, which still provides community benefit but helps feasibility. And also consider adopting some baseline policy changes that I'm going to talk about in this slide. So in addition to those major recommendations, we identify some baseline zoning updates that could make the zoning clearer and more feasible, especially for smaller projects that tends to hard to build. So first off, clarifying the definition of mixed-use building in the zoning bylaw right now, which is not clearly spelled out in the zoning, especially with the focus on clearly defining the horizontal mixed use, such as the scenario of a separate residential building locating behind another building that has a commercial uses on the ground floor. and also remove a few kind of inflexible requirements, such as requiring the residential footprint to be equal to or smaller than the commercial footprint, and requiring commercial construction before residential occupancy, which can deter investment. Also, we recommend considering the waiver for mixed use requirement for smaller residential project up to 6 units, so that it can support penciling out smaller infill development by reducing the cost burden. On the inclusionary zoning front, it is also possible to think about adding an in lieu fee by right option, especially for ownership projects and small rental projects, 6 to 12 units, that, affordable requirements tend to make development more infeasible than bigger project that tends to realize scale of economy of scale, actually. And lastly, reconsidering a few dimensional requirements, especially consider removing each building footprint, removing the requirement saying that each building footprint cannot exceed 15,000 square feet, or also reducing minimum lot size, which is currently 30,000 square foot, to allow for more compact development. So on this slide, we just wanted to show a few, successful mixed-use projects in different towns, to just illustrate how, successful mixed-use project could look like. And this is a example from Beverly, showing kind of example of, the mixed-use project that has strong street presence, retail on the ground floor and apartment above, and also at the scale that is walkable and fits into the surrounding context. Also, this example is from Foxborough. This is a mixed-use building located in their downtown with a street frontage ground floor, retail presence, and the significant number of residential units are behind the ground floor as well as above. So that's basically a big portion of our recommendation, and I want to shift to the discussion part. We listed quite a lot of prompt questions here, but I would probably start off by asking your initial thoughts and whether those policy options that we provided, 5 policy options that we provided, make sense, or is there any other policy options that we should consider? Also, we'll be curious to know your reactions to the requirement of 25 ground floor commercial as a requirement, our recommendations around density bonus, and offering flexibility on waiving commercial requirement based on the site conditions. Also kind of excluding small projects from mixed use requirement. With that, I think I will open for the discussion.
Well, thank you both. I mean, my initial thoughts, and I want to hear from the other board members, my initial thoughts are, we'd asked you to really look at this and come up with, some possible solutions, which you did. And I think that one slide that showed the pluses and minuses, that showed that Goldilocks zone based upon your analysis. It did show, I think, what was it, that one? Yeah. That shows the Goldilocks zone of what we should be basing our bylaws on, or modifying our bylaws to meet that, because otherwise we're not going to see development, just like we have now. We're not seeing anything. So that's just my initial response to what you presented. And then we'll have to look at the recommendations that you did make as far as zoning and see how they would incorporate into our bylaws. Anyone else?
I don't know. I am trying to remember what Melissa just wrote with all the 40B projects that we have. It almost seems like that attaining the 10% is a given. And if that's the case, just based on what already exists in potential 40B projects. It's almost like you need two strategies, one before you get to your 10% goal and one after your 10% goal, because it doesn't seem like it's going to be too far away. The others are already, was it 4 or 5 projects? Melissa's still on the line. I'm just thinking that
I think it was
what's
6.
already in go ahead, Melissa, sorry.
Oh, no, I think we said there were actually 6.
6.
One of them may not be currently in progress, but yes, I believe there were 6 in total.
And then with the Pondville, that didn't include the Pondville developments?
I'd have to look and see, but I know Pondville, obviously, with the 200 units was pretty
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah, so it seems like without struggling or forcing higher percentages on the downtown properties, that even if it's a year or two, we're going to be at goal. So it's almost like your strategy has 2 parts to it, right? Just a thought.
What, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I follow the 2 parts, Gary. What do you
Well,
mean?
there's a strategy to get to goal, which seems like we're
Oh.
going to get to goal regardless of what we do. So
Right.
should we be talking more about where do we want to be downstream from achieving 10%? It seems like most of the other towns, once they get to 10%, they back off from 20% burden on developers. Is
Gotcha.
there any reason we wouldn't start down that path right now?
Well, what we have isn't working for the developers because we're not seeing it. Yeah, what we have doesn't work. Now, there's also the whole sewer aspect of it. I mean, there's no secret there. We're trying to get some sewer in the downtown. It's kind of like one of those, you got to have the right infrastructure, and we don't, which makes it challenging when they have to use septic. That changes the whole economics when they got to use septic.
Okay. We have more than
Yeah.
one problem.
I know.
So we do, but we have talked before about over at Meeting House with the wastewater treatment facility over there. There is some capacity, right, that we would like to have reimbursed. And so it's not that we have none today. It just it isn't enough, most likely, for everything downtown.
Yeah, that's a really good point Melissa makes, is that there is extra capacity over there at Meeting House. It is designated currently to service that lot that everybody knows as the Stop and Shop lot. But beyond that, I don't know how much more capacity there is. It all depends on what would get built there, but probably not much more capacity available after that.
Just in terms of the sewer discussion, and another way that impacts things, in addition to just, feasibility or not, we heard from a lot of folks that and just based on Title V, without sewer, you can get a real estate agent or a bank or whatever else in that commercial space, but you're never going to get a restaurant in a commercial space that doesn't have sewer. And so to the extent that some of those more active uses are a town goal, just another card to add to the mix.
Nope, that's very fair. I mean, we've talked about that. We've talked about that on the master plan committee, and yeah, that is a goal that we're trying to strive for. I mean, that's the community feedback that we received, was they want that walkable downtown with with more restaurants, and we don't have it yet. Okay. Any other comments?
So as you know, we are trying, which is probably a long ways down the line at this point, but to try to see if we can acquire some sewer from the MCI Norfolk wastewater treatment plant, which would, and even at that, it would be limited as well how much that may be. So to get just another layer to this complexity is that if that were to happen, I think the long-term goal for the town would be to get rid of that packaged wastewater treatment plant, because it's expensive to operate and maintain too. So that is part of another set of goals outside of this, but that also plays into this potentially because you've got to replace that. So, in terms of flow, so that limits potential flow down the line. And I think, one of the things, and I know the question was asked, which is kind of hard, is finding that right. What's that peer, right? So what's that town that you aspire to be? It's pretty challenging to find that peer, say, okay, this is what we want to try to emulate, because no one town is alike, right? And that's the hard part. And the fact that, while a lot of great work is planned and there's a road system and there's lots there, but they're now buildings there, so that it's ground up construction. So even some of the things that we saw already are, for example, the Foxborough one, I'm sure that's been around a while.
Yeah.
That building it didn't happen within this past 10 years. I'm not sure about the Beverly one. So, I mean, as much as we look around, it's challenging. And then you have, I don't know. This is a big, in terms of like aspirational goal to feasible goal, and feasible goal along a certain timeline. Like, I think there's too many asks so far. What we're seeing, that's kind of I mean, Gary Sewell, you made the point about we need to get to 10%. Like, I mean, we got two competing goals. Like, I don't know. I raised a lot of.
That's a good point, Rich and Gary. We do have multiple challenges that are, addressable. And I think I know what we're talking about here is just, the B1, the downtown, that was this project. But I think that also brings back, just in general, the inclusionary bylaw. It made sense that, if you increase that logically, right, it makes sense that if you increase the number of affordable units along with the number of units that you're building, that you would get to that number faster. But what we're seeing is not that. What we're seeing is that it's pushing developers towards 40B, right? Which is just higher density. It's more units. It's in fact, the latest one, Rich, I think was double, is more than double the units when the developer chose to go with a 40B, because that was the best solution for them financially. That's how, I mean, this is a business, right? For developers, this is what they do for a living. They're not going to do something that doesn't make them money. They're going to do what makes them the most amount of money. If they're, and of course there will be some cases where, there's a project that's super important to somebody and they want to put extra money into design or something. But for the most part, it's a pretty simple concept. And I think that we need to address that as well, because it's obviously not, we're pushing developers towards 40B instead of traditional development, which is going to cause some challenges with emergency services, with our school, obviously, which is already at capacity. So we need to address that as well.
I think I would
Well, I think-
expand what you said, Melissa, is the intention of our current inclusionary zoning at such a high level was that we would get there through our current bylaws, because if we want to reach 10%, we can't be at 10%. I know that was stated. I think Peter Diamond, I quote Peter Diamond, I think he's on the call. He's like, we're never gonna reach our 10% if our affordable's at 10%. And so we got to change that. And so we did. What we're seeing is we're not getting the development through normal methods following our inclusionary zoning. What we're seeing is just what Melissa said. What we're seeing is the developers are pivoting over to 40B. So we're getting there faster than we thought because of that. But once we do reach that 10%, then it does change things, and we'll have to revisit the inclusionary zoning bylaw accordingly.
I just want to add that B1 zoning, when we did this 3, 4, 5 years ago now, it was not designed with the intent of solving the affordable piece, right? Like, the affordable discussion and the B1 discussion are two different things, right? Back when we created these bylaws, we were saying 10 to 15% affordability for B1. We were hoping, this is turning back the clock now. We were hoping somebody's going to pick up Southwood and make that some sort of high density housing, solve problems there. But for this piece, right, when we're looking at policy options for B1, I mean, at scale, let's say we had infrastructure in place. You don't want B1 to be solving your affordable housing issue, because that's just way too much stuff down there, right? We just want to focus on a nice mixture, walkable downtown of some residential with commercial. So I'm not sure if having a wider conversation about affordability is apt for this piece. There's other policy recommendations that were made that I think are interesting, and I mean, I can give opinions on that, and we can all give opinions on that, but the broader affordable conversation, I think, is not very apt for B1, in my opinion.
Yeah, no,
Right.
you bring up a good point, Gary. And the focus of this study was for the downtown, not the whole town. And yeah, we do need to have a broader discussion. But the focus that we had asked MAPC was for our downtown. And Peter Diamond, I just want to make sure I quoted you right. You're on the call, right? So
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, Chad?
yeah, I can.
The inclusionary zoning bylaw is not really to get us to 10%, but to maintain a level of 10%, because there were a lot of developments that were being done to just avoid the 10%.
Right.
And there was a couple of developments in town that just did 9 units, so they didn't have to do an affordable.
Yep.
So we tried to roll that back to 6 to capture some affordables. When they do that, we don't really get to 20% inclusionary zoning till you get to 20 or more.
Right.
So, and now that we have all these large 40Bs on the horizon that will trigger us right up to 10%, it's even more important to maintain a higher percentage in our inclusionary zoning bylaw so that we don't fall back out of the 10%.
Yes
Oh, I
and
see
no
what you're
though,
saying.
because it also changes every time that we add another, well, anything really, but especially with 40B where it's high density, we're adding a significant number. We're changing our denominator each time as well, right? So we're growing our town, and then we're always going to be trying to reach that 10%, and it makes it more challenging when you have higher density and more units being built.
Yep.
Well, and I think one of the things that on the earlier slide was talked about, what the rule of thumb for of good profit, right? So 15%. Well, that's a lot of risk for 15%, because actually, if I took my money and stuck in the stock market long term, I probably could get, what is it, 8 to 10 over the life of it, the duration of it. So for 5% more, it's a lot more risk. So my point is, I think the conception out there is that developers make huge profit margins on development. And maybe that might have been at some point in time, but it certainly doesn't seem to be the case anymore. In fact, the 40Bs that we got back, which are capped at 20%, they're not even close to 20% in terms of hitting those numbers. So even in those cases, there was concern years ago with 40B and overriding local zoning and the profitability, and the money would come back to the town. They're not even measuring out at those numbers. So what conception people's thoughts about in terms of development and how much they make, they're just not, it's not where we are today in reality. And so what we're balancing off is this fear of our development making so much profitability that we erode everything. And we're not talking about eroding away everything, but striking that balance. And we're not balanced. We're trying to do too much.
Well, the good thing is this time we actually have data points, right? Like before,
Right.
I think it was a really good idea to try to increase our affordable number and see how it would work. And now we know we have actual data to show how it's actually motivating developers, right? Which is towards 40B, higher density, more units overall, and then we're chasing our 10% for even longer.
Through the chair, Chad, Peter Diamond. Melissa,
sure.
could you give me examples of which developments are forced towards 40B?
Yeah,
that you-
I'm sure Rich has told us
Sure.
about a few, but I think the
Palmville
latest.
Crossing.
So
Palmville Crossing.
Palmville Crossing is the 200 unit.
Yep.
Yes.
So that's in C C1 on highway. So it's a split
C1
zone there, right? So it's in
C1D.
C1 on highway and C1D off highway. So
Yep.
they're subject to part of their zone in split zone not being able to build housing on it. So
There's
they're forced,
a small portion that's in the on highway, but the rest of it's in the C1D.
and they were able to do the MBTA zoning, right?
Not
And they could have
Palmville
done
Crossing. Palmville Crossing is not
Palmville
in the
Station could have.
Yes.
Palmville Station could.
So
Palmville Station could when we had passed we did the MBTA in the spring.
and then we
And
have
there-
Whitney's Way, which was 8 units that is being swallowed up by Palmville Crossing, where a developer went 40B just for 8 units. And
Yeah,
that's because that's C1 on highway.
So there's extraneous circumstances a little bit if we, get into, who was doing what on that project. But there was a proposal to extend the multifamily to that property, which was defeated at town meeting, if you recall, was to continue the duplexes that are on Valley Street now and Hill Street. And when that didn't happen, then it switched to the 40B. The point about Pondville Crossing is that it's in the multifamily district, and the density that was underlying in that wasn't sufficient to do rental housing that was scalable because the 20% weighted it down. It didn't make it economically feasible.
And then there was the other one too, Rich. I always forget the name, Cranberry something. But it was,
Cranberry Heights.
thank you,
Cranberry Heights was
21 units, and now it's 51
20, and now it's 51 units.
because they opted to go the 40B route. So, I mean, we've heard that from just in our own, planning board meetings, but I hear that in my professional life as well from folks that want nothing to do with building in Norfolk.
The other 25 Valley Street, now they got included in the MBTA zoning. So and they're also in the multifamily district was another one. The property owner came, and he owns the property. It's not like he was selling it off to somebody else. Came in and said, listen, 20% is not gonna work for me to do it. I might as well try 40B. And when we push things to 40B, then local regulations are people can request waivers. So we're trying to achieve one thing and we're pushing things the other way. And then now people well aware of Palmville Crossing. And now that scalable is too much, too many units, too dense to scale, etc. So I don't know.
I'm gonna apologize for being grumpy.
Okay.
This presentation is about B1, right? Unless there's a idea to say, hey, let's have some sort of warrant article sometime in the future that sets a specific affordability rate for B1. Can we stay focused to this thing?
Yep,
Sure. I'll bring it back to B1.
Thank you for bringing us back, Gary.
I'll bring it back to B1. When we worked on the B1 4 years ago, we had talked about affordable housing to keep it where it was at.
We did.
Not to go down to 6 units, keep it at 10%. So we still got something. And then not have it scale up. And as you know, we got the inclusionary went forward, which scaled it up. So it put more weight on that, which is weighting down what we're trying to talk about today. We're trying to accomplish too many things in a small commercial town center district. That's the bottom line with this. That's where we're at. To get back to the topic at hand.
So I think we definitely need further discussion on the whole town for inclusionary zoning. But the goal, obviously the goal of the request of MAPC and the goal tonight is to go through their findings for the downtown, and it looks like we have them. And we need to take these back and make some decisions on how we want to move forward. And I think it's, yes, once these 40Bs do get approved and we do start seeing them developed and it changes our numbers, changes our ratio, then we'll have to adjust townwide to follow suit.
Can we adjust zone by zone? Is that something we want to entertain and look at doing, or
So,
right? Because it doesn't make it. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Sue.
sorry. You know, so we've had a lot of discussion around that at the Affordable Housing Trust meetings and with Rich. You know, if you get into zoning by zoning and you have some areas, let's say, that are 25% of affordable housing, you're really shifting the affordable housing all into one area. You know, if you spot zone like that, let's say you say, okay, well, over here we're gonna have 25%, but here, here, and here we're gonna have 10%. You know, I think we do what many other communities have done, and we go back to 10% until we reach our threshold, and then we regroup and discuss if we want to, you know, have a tiered inclusionary zoning bylaw again. Because, you know, to back up what Chad said, you know, people are going to see these large developments that are going to come through as 40B projects. And, you know, one in particular, I think, is going to be pretty shocking. And it is because of the inclusionary zoning bylaw change. And, you know, it's a very dense project. So I think that instead of trying to go back to our 10% and think about other areas that maybe we could increase it, I think we just, you know, we work hard to get back to the 10%, get back to the 10% of inclusionary zoning bylaw. And then if we reach the 10% subsidized housing inventory, and we want to have a conversation, Gary, about, do we want to, you know, put it in different areas, or do we just go back to the entire town having a tiered inclusionary zoning bylaw?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. The other thing we need to consider for the downtown, just to keep things focused on the downtown, is this Goldilocks zone that we see here on this slide shows the 10 to 15% affordable, but it also shows a change in commercial rents on the ground floor. So it's not enough to just change the affordability percentage for the downtown area. We do look at the possibility of changing that commercial to make this work.
You know, something else too that I noticed from the team at MAPC sent what slide is this? It was slide 25, the mixed use zoning, and it showed us and the other towns compared enough. Oh, thank you, that one. There was something that I liked, which is, what was it? I think it was Marlborough and Foxborough. Their bylaw is 35% of the facade surface, right? So that just means, in architectural terms, that just means the exterior wall that's, you know, like the main entrance or at the front of the building or whatever is most prominent. Could be front and side if it's on a corner. But if you think about that, if it's 35% and you're looking at it from the outside of the building, you know, just what you can see on the outside, maybe in the front areas of the building, that's commercial, or, you know, small businesses downstairs. But in the back, where you can't really see, that could be the stairwells or whatever it may be for the residential. So that that was something that stuck out to me that I thought could be interesting to look into, how that would change it, because we have total square footage, gross square footage. That's, you know, that's a lot. That's a lot of space in a building. So if it was the facade, maybe that would change things and make it, you know, kind of a better happy medium for the people in town that drive by and see it and want it to look nice, and the developers who need to make money to keep their businesses going. And it de-risks the project for them. Well, lowers the risk. I won't say de-risk.
So to continue the conversation on the mixed use piece and not necessarily the inclusionary zoning, what is the market conditions, and is there a list of projects by town that MABC could provide of, what's actually being built that's mixed use in adjacent or nearby communities, that's not 100% residential? Is the market there for that, what we're asking for, or is it really residential projects are the market share of everything, the lion's share?
I mean, I think the town does have leeway to ask for some commercial. It's just the more commercial you ask for, the less of other things you can ask for, and the more risky it gets that something won't happen. I think we had a couple of people cite Foxboroughs as being like pretty workable. A couple of developers cite Foxboroughs as being pretty workable. They had that the window transparency metric rather than the area metric that you just mentioned, Melissa. I know that Maynard has had some success as well with actually getting mixed use projects built on a smaller scale. We don't have numbers on how much has been built, but we can look. And I don't know that that's something that I can promise in depth, but we can certainly come up with some examples from a few municipalities.
I'd be interested in a table of square footage and number of projects in towns that are actually building them, and what their mixed use zoning is, and if it's changed recently to make that happen, or if it's they're already at their 10% and there is no inclusionary zoning burden.
What are there any municipalities? Are there any municipalities in particular that have caught your eye, or just in general?
In general, I see residential everywhere, and
yeah,
a lot of it is probably 40B. So give me the examples of what's not, what is working mixed use zoning in towns that have not, and in towns that have not met their 10, and towns that have met their 10%.
Yeah, we can see
I don't see it happening in Franklin. Maybe it is. Maybe I just don't. I'm overwhelmed by all the
yeah. Franklin has so much older building stock. They've kind of working with a different set of bones. But that's so we will call around to see if we can get some numbers.
Thank you. I think that would be useful.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Can you go back to the end of the list of questions just so we can kind of make sure we. Sure. So
go ahead, Rich.
The concept of the density bonus, I'm curious about.
Yep.
The board's reaction to a density bonus.
So can you elaborate, Alexis or Juwan, on what was the density bonus?
So currently, the residential density allowed in the town center is 16 units per acre.
Yep.
And when we're testing out different options, we considered 25% density bonus, which would mean allowing up to 20 units per acre.
Gotcha. Okay.
Without changing the envelope. So
Yep.
no change in the height limit, no change in the setbacks, just within the existing envelope that's already allowed.
Okay. So, Rich, we have the MBTA zoning overlay in not all the downtown district. How would that impact? I'm trying to think of how that impacts that overlay district, because you can choose to use the MBTA zoning, right, or not.
So the current overlay district is essentially on the periphery. It's not the core parcels that we're really talking about.
Right.
So, you know,
No, I'm just trying to think if there were any with some overlap. And I think I answered my own question, is that you
well,
could.
the one that was overlap, they asked to push it, which I know 15 Rockwood Road, maybe not the best example, but that was in the B1, and they asked to be included in the MBTA overlay district.
Could you add a column to this same table that shows the MBTA zoning? Because that's kind of available and we're not seeing that being grabbed up on these sites.
Yeah, I will say that.
The
So the
MBTA
initial,
zoning, if the MBTA zoning was applied to the B1?
Well, it's applicable to certain parcels, a number of them.
They would have no commercial impact though. I mean, so it'd be not sure. I see where you're going, Eric. Not sure how we'd incorporate that into this slide, but it's a good idea. I don't.
I mean, I
Well,
think
so it's
if-
available and it's not being used right now, and I'm not a proponent of it necessarily, but on your chart, it looks like it should be, lots of pluses,
yeah, I would imagine it. I imagine it would be.
but we're not seeing that.
well, so in terms of,
It's
so
pretty
let's,
new though.
yeah,
Were
it was
any
done
lots?
last May, so it's coming up on a year. But if you recall the way, and I don't know if I can screen, I have to go on the what. So in terms of the parcels that are within town center, they're already developed parcels, primarily already developed residentially. So in terms of changeover, it's probably not likely at all. 15 Rockwood Road is one that is in there, and they're proposing to file a project actually in a couple months from now, in May. They're looking at doing a project under the MBTA zoning. So we don't really have a lot. We purposely exclude a lot of the area because there's a community goal of having commercial. So if we overlay the MBT over top of it, they're going to pick the all residential option, which is
Right.
kind of in this matrix in a way, right? Almost the bottom right hand corner. If you take away the commercial, it's going to be all green down there. Well, not all four. Well, the second one, right? So 10%.
Yeah.
Go across.
Yeah.
It's going to be a green light, and so we're trying to see if we can strike a balance where we could do both.
Well, yeah, 10% and no commercial. I mean, yeah, it's.
Yeah, any analysis would find that to be quite feasible. And again, that's the stuff like this doesn't take into account sewer or a recalcitrant neighbor or whatever else, but any analysis would find the MBTA community zoning here to be to work quite well from a feasibility perspective.
Right. And this was the district in particular that we worked really hard to keep it out of so that we wouldn't have a town center with just enormous apartment buildings, and we would be able to deliver on the goal of having the mixed use and the vibrant downtown that all the residents say that they want.
Yeah. So we talked about the density bonus. Can you go back to the questions again? So comfort level, the next one was comfort level offering flexibility on commercial requirement through special permit. So that is something we should discuss and I think if you go back a slide or two, you had your recommendations.
Right.
That there, and there, is it this one that you recommended No, I don't think it was this one. You did have a slide.
The second bullet point under number 1.
Yeah, there you go.
Essentially, what we heard from Rich and from developers is that stuff that works, there's always that one parcel where stuff just doesn't work. If there's a slope or there's a something or there's an easement, and so just the intent of this was to provide a relief valve to give the planning board the ability to provide a mechanism to provide a relief valve for developers in those unique situations. If the planning board sees fit.
Yeah, my thoughts on that would be is we'd have to develop some very
We'd
clear
have to define it.
criteria
Yeah.
on that. We just don't want we don't want it to be a blank check type thing.
Yes.
And although, we have a great board right now, and I think we're all very reasonable and would be very mindful what the town citizens want, we're not going to be around forever. So obviously that's what zoning, we're trying to build a zoning, whatever change we make to the zoning bylaws, we want them to be there in place when we're not. So, okay.
Right.
There was some other, one was, I know recall about, which I think would be helpful, defining mixed use, right? So that becomes a little bit clearer. People, that was an issue. And then in the building footprint has been definitely something that's come up multiple times. Essentially the way the bylaw is written right now, it's infeasible, between having the commercial footprint and the residential footprint. It's not just a ratio. It's not 35-65. It's also a footprint component, which has been proven to be problematic. So the one about the residential occupancy prior to the commercial, that kind of, I wonder, and it's just a food for thought. One of the recommendations you had was about reducing lot size. And I'm wondering if it'd be interesting to see if you reduce lot size, that instead of trying to play games or move around with putting, commercial and residential, that if something was smaller, it may help to get away from that, incentivize it. I'm just something to think about.
I'm not sure I follow you, Rich. On so you're talking about reducing the lot sizes to to do what?
Well, so for example, maybe it's a standalone. It is standalone on a smaller scale. I mean, I'm
Right.
talking about, the mixed use for a small residential project up to 6 units.
Right.
Maybe that becomes an option as infill, where the lot size might be too much now to make that happen.
Oh, I see. But
Where, you know what I mean?
no, I see what you're saying. But then do we run the risk of somebody subdividing their lot into a whole bunch of little lots so they can just build all residential?
Yeah, that's
There can
definitely.
be you can add an anti-segmentation clause. A lot of most inclusionary zoning policies include a clause that say you can't subdivide it to skirt their affordability requirements. So you could include something like that. The AG has reviewed that language in tons of bylaws.
We should look at that, but we should make a note of that, because we've seen that happen in this town on other.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should look at that and add it to our bylaw townwide.
Okay, yeah, Rich, I can send you one. It's in a lot of inclusionary bylaws.
Okay.
I'm trying to think if there's an example. So I'm looking at the mixed use third bullet, waiving mixed use requirement for small residential projects. So we're only talking about the B1, which is where we really want mixed use. Is there a scenario that I'm not seeing where it would be a good thing to approve just residential in the B1?
Would Rockwood fall under that small Rockwood parcel?
But that one's already in the MBTA.
No, I know. Right. It has a different method to get to the residential through the MBTA zoning, but if it didn't have the overlay for MBTA, then they could, and we had that in there, they might fall under that small residential project.
So what if it was, to just for discussion purposes, it was not a complete waiver of mixed use, but the amount of it was not as much. So for example, a portion of it. So Because one of the things we heard about, and this is, the Boardman, not Boardman, sorry, the Main Street Boardman property, which, has the first floor essentially was supposed to be commercial, and it's never been built out. And so then somebody maybe they want to buy that property and then redevelop it, but the commercial, I mean, that was one of the things we heard from them, that the commercial is still too much, but maybe there's a way to do it. So there's still some commercials, not all of it, but it's not completely waived, where that is not as walkable per se. I mean, it's not walkable. It's not as attractive, enticing, if you will, to walk that way to the center.
I mean,
Like,
or
for example,
alternatively, if mixed use truly is the town's priority in this area, then maybe well, I guess I was going to say you could waive the affordability requirements there, but I guess that projects of this size would already not be subject to it.
Well, and I think too, Rich, it's important to say that that property that never was developed, it's really not even feasible parking wise to have what has been proposed there for many years, or what they're trying to do there. So maybe there are some pieces of property that are smaller pieces of property where we could get some small residential projects with 6 units, because we keep saying that we need the folks to live in the downtown area to support the downtown districts, right? The commercial people that want to come to our town. So, certainly I think we add that bylaw language so that you cannot subdivide your lot to skirt that. But I think it's important that if we have some parcels where this is really what works best, rather than trying to cram something else in that, maybe isn't going to work as efficiently. Just my opinion is that we should consider it.
So essentially we have to have like a base, but then you have to build in some flexibility because every site has its own uniqueness in terms of how you do it. That I don't have the answer for that, but that's kind of what it feels to try to get to that point. Because that's a good example of that. Because there was people more recently come and say, hey, maybe I'll put a restaurant in there. And then they're looking at which obviously you have to look at the septic flow. But then at the end of the day, they're like, there's not really enough parking. So then could we do something with the post office part? You know what I mean? So to your point, so that became a factor because there's not enough density to walk to it as a restaurant. People are going to drive to it and go, right? That's Norfolk Center will be more walkable, but it's not a walkable town center like I think a lot of people envision. And that's kind of that balance to try to get to. I didn't solve anything, I'm sorry, but just an observation though. So
Until we go back to the question.
Oh, actually, so there's a good one, Chad. I
Which
saw
one?
that.
Which one?
Which we haven't. So in lieu for rental, actually. So we do have it for ownership, but the thought of having a payment in lieu for rental projects,
Small rental projects.
small
Right.
rental projects.
Yeah, that's something we should look at, consider possibly.
What would we put the fee towards?
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll be there to grab it, Chris.
I'm so happy that it's you.
So we'll do wonderful things with it.
Yeah.
And actually, so just a little point of emphasis on that actually came up. Hate to keep going to Rockwood Road, I guess, but as you know, the developer came in before the board and talked about it, and they're going to they'll be proposing an ownership unit as the affordable, and in large part because of, and Sue could talk more about this, and Alexis obviously, but with rental affordability, that's a scalable thing as well. So the smaller amount of rental affordable housing, it's pretty challenging in terms of
It's
they have to maintain
real
an
hard. Yep. A big 200 unit development, like they got people on staff who know exactly how to write a deed restriction and exactly how to do annual certifications. But you got a little like a local a local guy who's doing like a 10 unit building. Like they don't know how to and like it's just it's a big challenge for small developments.
Has anything ever been done or proposed where in lieu of affordable housing, the town receives a percentage of the profit or proceeds that are generated by the rental income in perpetuity or for a certain amount of time?
I'm not aware of anything that exists like that.
Is there
In
any reason
Massachusetts.
why we wouldn't be able to do that? Or Rich, would you have to ask town council about that?
Feel like that's my legal my get a lawyer in here senses are tingling with that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm not thinking like a huge percent by any means, but like a 1 to 2, or I'd go almost as high as 3%.
So I think, you know, we probably would be the first community to roll that out if it was
I love
something
being
we wanted to
first.
do, right? So, you know, but I think it would be interesting to try to get some feedback on it from folks that are building these apartment developments, large and small, because we've heard earlier that the units cost the same to build, and they're getting significantly higher rents from the market units.
Right.
And just so everybody knows, you may already know this, but you know, a 1-bedroom rental in the town of Norfolk right now, the rate at the 80% average median income, the rates are in the $2,200 range. So, you know, they're not inexpensive, and I think on, you know, just all of the increases that we've all seen in our own properties and our insurance on our homes and our electric bills and, you know, all of those things, and what builders are feeling with the cost of product to build. It's an interesting area to get some additional information on.
Yeah, I mean at 3%, let's say, at that rent that you just said, on a yearly basis for a property that has 20 units, we could make $15,840 a year on that one property. And that could go to support other initiatives that you have.
Right, which would be great, but also keep in mind that they have to pay for a monitoring agent for each one of those properties each year to review the applicants and to make sure that they have remained income qualified. And if they go outside of the income limits, then they're no longer eligible for that affordable unit. So then it has to be turned around, you know,
Well, I'm saying this would be in lieu of
great
having an
idea.
affordable unit, right? Like if we were getting paid,
Right.
they would have to pay for that monitor.
Right. So
I think
I
it'd
just
have to
think
be. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I think there's some other fees involved that are coming out of those rental amounts already that they have absolutely no give on, as far as the monitoring agent, the marketing, you know. And on the smaller projects, I've in a big development, potentially maybe. In a smaller project, I just don't see how they could bear that type of a fee or payment in lieu of on top of what they've got going. 200 units, maybe we want to be the first in that. 6 to
I think
12
it'd have
to
to be
20.
structured to be voluntary, but it'd be cool if there were developers that were interested in it.
Right. You know, it's the same. Rich and I met with a company that is very interested in trying to provide, just as a side note, housing for folks that have disabilities but can live on their own, right? And it's not something you want to force the developer to do, but this particular developer, and I don't know whether the company will end up doing it or not, but he thought, hey, that sounds like a really cool idea. you know, I could make, say, 4 of the 20 units, affordable units for folks with disabilities. And, you know, he said he would get some additional information. So there's definitely, you know, being the first at something is great. But I think you're absolutely right, Alexis. I think it would have to be voluntary.
So our takeaway list, I think you probably, do you want to, next steps, I think, Chair?
Did any town offer tax incentives? Taxes came up on your list, but just to get developers, you know, delayed taxes. Did that come up anywhere?
Taxes are a very, very, very recently enabled, up until like less than a year ago, I think you needed a home rule petition to do it. So it's something that is, there's like 1 or 2 municipalities on the Cape that got that got their home rule petition for it, but otherwise it is a very new tool. I'm hoping that property taxes are a super powerful cost offset. And just in turn, like at a theoretical analysis level. So I'm really hoping some towns will take up on it, but nobody has yet, to my knowledge, because it only got enabled like last year.
I think we'll have to wait on that one here.
Yeah, I don't
I mean,
think
it's a tough argument for finance committee.
Yeah.
Don't be so negative.
Chris, I don't want to be first on that one.
No, I do not advocate that one. No.
Okay. All right. Just checking.
The next steps moving forward.
Yeah. So it seems that if there is interest in, you know, having a more flexible, lower percent commercial, is that?
Yep. Lower percent commercial, lower inclusionary.
Lower inclusionary.
We need to look at how do we structure that with possibly some special permits or some, I guess, allowances for the planning board to make some decisions on some things for those creative lots, some discretion, I guess you could say. And I know Eric Diamond had some questions. He wanted to get some feedback from you, Alexis and Jiwan, on just some of those towns that, you know, he had mentioned that have they changed their bylaws recently and the impacts they've seen from that. And he had some other questions.
Yeah, and see what it's out there, some new projects that maybe around mixed use.
And again, the focus is for all this was on our B1. But as we kind of got off topic a little bit earlier, is like we do need to look at this townwide, and as these 40Bs become developed, it will change our ratio, and so we'll need to look at that holistically for the town when that time's appropriate.
So that is yes, good point. And I guess I'll throw out the question: do we have some communities that we would want to try to use as comps? Because this is always the discussion point. Well, that, you know, this one doesn't work. That one. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you have. Like, because it's always hard, right, to say.
We're very unique.
No two
say that.
Well,
yeah.
Everybody's unique. No two towns are alike, but to see if we can, like, maybe it's aspirational town or something would might be comparable, because
well, I don't think the whole town is comparable, obviously, but the Islington section of Westwood, I think, has done a great job.
Oh my goodness. Are you kidding me? No, just kidding. Go ahead. No, it's great.
Like I'm only pulling that section, right? But I think that they've done a great job in their developing their downtown Islington section. There are quite a few buildings that are similar to our building next door to Town Hall, with some commercial on the bottom and some residential on the top. The buildings fit nicely. They don't They don't look like something that doesn't belong. They look like they work there. And I think that's the problem is that you can't just say, okay, just give us the information on Islington and don't include the rest of Westwood, because then it makes it not really a comparable town.
And
We'll see what we can come up with.
Yeah, but the other point is fair too, because like we don't have a built town center either, so we're really trying to model something that's going to be there down the road, right? So that's always kind of the struggle. By the way, I suppose I could, if the board was interested, if that developer would come in and just kind of share their experience there, if you wanted to hear about it from the
The one in
developer's
Westwood?
perspective. Yeah,
Yeah.
I might be able to get him to. He's the same developer, did a lot of work in Dedham Center, so.
Bring him in.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm just thinking, I don't know. I mean, comparable is tough, right? Because again, there's no one town that's the same as another. But do you guys hear as much as I do from folks around town that whenever they're talking about us, they compare us to Medfield? I mean, everybody talks about Brothers, right? We want to get something like Brothers. We want to get something like Brothers. Or, Medfield downtown is walkable. Medfield has like an arts area. There's like, I feel like that's the town. Although I used to live there, my taxes were way higher than here. So I don't think people want those. But I feel like more and more I'm hearing a lot about Medfield. Like we want this in Norfolk to be like Medfield. I don't know if you guys have that same experience or if there's like some other town that people mention to you.
Yeah, I mean, towns are always. I grew up in Milton, right? So Quincy's always like, oh, we want to be like Milton. Quincy was perfectly fine. It's just Milton was the more affluent town. Medfield's the more affluent town. People want to be more like that. And to be fair, I mean, that that downtown in Medfield kicks butt, right? That's a great little walkable area with Brothers and a great restaurant, so I get it. Would love to get there. We need I've mentioned this to many of you already before. We need just a millionaire retiree benefactor to just step in, and maybe a child's book author who's willing to revamp the entire downtown.
I
a la
knew
Plainville.
you were heading there.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, and the
Plainville is so
tough part
lucky.
for Norfolk downtown is, even if, the wealthy benefactor came in, Gary, right, and provided us sidewalks or made it more of a walkable downtown, I live on, not far, it's certainly a walkable distance. I live on Needham Street, but I can't walk up Needham Street to get to my sidewalk to get uptown. So we struggle with that on top of our downtown not really being walkable. We don't have enough kind of those offshoot neighborhoods that can walk to the center of town. You go to Rentham, although, Rentham's a bigger town, but you go to Rentham on a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday night, and their downtown is hopping. But again, there's a lot more areas, a lot more neighborhoods that have the accessibility that they need. To be able to walk and get to the center of town, or, they have the town public parking lot that they just redid, where there's a tremendous amount of parking for folks to drive there, leave their cars and walk. So it's difficult, I think, and I am one of the people that complains that, when folks come in with things and they compare us to towns like Dedham and, Lexington, they're communities that have 30 to 40,000 people in them, if not more. And so to me, it's really hard to show them as a comparison, because they're just so much larger than we are, and they have so much more revenue coming in than we do. So I think it's hard when you bring in, a community that's not really remotely close to the size of the Norfolk population.
All right, we'll see what we can come up with.
Yep.
All
Any
right.
other comments?
When do you think we can get back together? I guess that's my.
Yep.
That would be, well, probably at this point, got a probably May, I would think.
We have we have a meeting on April 8th. I don't know if that's enough time, and then the next would be May 13th.
Yeah.
And May 13th is right before a town meeting, right? So that one's
Yep.
probably going to be pretty dedicated to that content.
So true.
Yeah.
So there's an option. You could always do a special meeting. You want to try to target a range, like a time frame, what that would be. Maybe it's after.
Alexis, you and G1, let us know what works for you all as timing, because yeah, we're kind of in that final push to get everything ready for town meeting on the 14th. So to have something like this at our regular meeting, obviously we're an hour and a half in, hour and 40 minutes into this, and it's been a great discussion. But I don't, maybe we do need to have a special meeting just to talk about this.
You said you so at the, I mean, I think this is the variable on this one is going to be a little bit out of our control, because it sounds like some of what we're looking for is going to be dependent on the responsiveness of the town planners. We're getting, we can get, MAPC has general development information, but getting like a commercial square footage is probably going to rely on the town planner sharing some stuff with us, which could be like 3 days or it could be 3 weeks. It's
right.
So I'm reluctant to commit to something like 3 weeks from now, just because it's going to be dependent on how responsive people are.
Yep. No, I understand. So maybe what we ought to do is just put that on. You do what you need to do. We'll circle
back
we can
around.
have Rich circle back with you in a couple weeks, see where
Perfect,
you're
yeah.
at. And we could try to get something on the calendar, maybe for end of April
Sounds
or
good.
sometime in May.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also something we can share with you in a write-up in between meetings. Everyone's heading into town meeting season. So if that's the easiest way to get that to you, we can certainly do that as well. And we already owe you a more detailed write-up of the analysis.
Let's do that. Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
Okay. And then again, we can assess on the 8th, like preparedness for town meeting too, right?
Right. Yeah, Rich, I mean, we'll obviously keep this on our monthly agenda just to talk about it. Point.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So Alexis, whenever you have that, send over right up that we can look at.
We can definitely have something in a month that might not be as complete as it might be stage 1, let's say.
That's fine. That's whatever you have. Yep, that's fine. All right. Anything else?
No, I think that.
Oh, thanks for the good discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for doing all this research. This is great.
Yep. Thank you. Was there any other like unanticipated new business that we need to talk about? Okay.
No.
All right. Well, any other final questions, comments, concerns?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Right.